Hey guys, on today's episode, we're doing something that I've wanted to do for about 8 years, and that of course is buy my own building and build it exactly the way that I wanted it. Now, I've been looking for a long time for a commercial space, and I wanted to shoot videos in, bring the cars in detail, live filming, training, podcast, all these things that I've just been dreaming about, and I didn't really have a place to do it. Now I do. So this video is gonna go over all the steps from beginning to end of how I built the place, exactly the way that I envisioned it, which was a big deal because you guys know how crazy I am about all these things. But here it is. I'll give you the tour. We're going to go through step by step. Now, this is 6 months worth of effort. So you're going to see from beginning to end. It looks like this now, and then I'll show you what it looks like at the end. And I have to tell you, bringing you guys along is probably one of the most exciting parts of actually building the building. I feel like I can share it with you because it's kind of like your guys too. I don't know. So I am super excited. I hope you guys appreciate the show and appreciate this episode, and more importantly, thank you guys. After watching this building for about 2 years, visiting, thinking, and then debating, I finally put it in an offer that was initially rejected, but then eventually accepted after about 4 months. First was a regular inspection, then a phase 1 and phase 2 commercial inspection that all passed with flying colors. Once all was clear, I needed to find an architect who could conceptualize my vision and then put it into a drawing that would enable me to get a permit and start construction. I eventually chose Jonathan Kost as my architect. He's responsible for the building drawings, submitting the town paperwork, working with all the inspectors, and so on. But he also created a 3D rendering to help me flush out my ideas so that the expectations, scope of work, and budget could all be met. Based on my vision and Jonathan's 3D rendering software, I could actually feel myself in the building. Now, my goal was to open up the space and create 3 levels or areas to see the work being done down on the first floor for future in-person detail classes, maybe car events, or a waiting area for clients. Now, on the other side of the building would be my office, and then on the 3rd floor would be the editing suite. Listen, this all sounds great. Having a vision is wonderful, but execution is the key. To do this, I had to pick a construction team that I believed would actually get the job done. After several weeks and 6 interviews later, I eventually picked Hallis Construction. Once all the paperwork was done, John, Gordy, and I sat down for a pre-game meeting to decide what I wanted versus what could be done, was it in budget, and how long would it take to complete. Once we all were comfortable, on day 1, we brought in the first of 4 dumpsters and posted a newly city-approved drawing on the wall so that everybody in the building could be on the same page. Now, just to give you a little bit of a preview of how the studio transformed over the year, here are a few shots of what it looked like on day 1 and then almost a year later. So step number 1 is pretty obvious. We had to knock down 3 of the 4 walls to open up the space. However, in the process, we discovered instead of wood 2x4s, which is pretty standard, we actually had metal studs that were used and required double the amount of time and labor to remove because each of them was welded to the next one, already adding a bit of sort of redesign or engineering phone calls on day number 1. Once the sheetrock was down and the beams were exposed, the 3rd floor loft ceiling was covered in rustic knotted pine and had a log attached to create a Hungarian ski lodge type feel. Now keep in mind that the previous owner was Hungarian and he was a blacksmith, hence all of the steel and all of the welds. You'll see all of his touches throughout this video, but to update the lighting, the insulation, install some closets and stairs, all of this needed to be removed.
So we've got a balcony floor structure that's attached to our metal studs right now. What we want to do is eliminate the entire wall that our floor structure is attached to. So we need to come up with a way to reattach our floor structure above to eliminate this wall.
Technically speaking, at this point, the space is considered a loft, but there were actually no stairs to get to it, so we had to build them later on to turn it into a usable space. Next, with the north side of the building down to the metal frame, we focused on my office by opening up the walls for the future windows that will overlook the cars on the first floor. With the demo in the office going really well, downstairs, Marcelo took a test core from the extra thick garage floor. Now keep in mind, the floor needed to hold super heavy steel, so we need to know how thick it was prior to installing the lift. Pretty much everything was metal, steel, and then all of that was welded together. So this is a much harder demo than we originally thought. Next, we focused on the garage floor. First, we made mock-ups of the lifts with plywood to get a feel for where they would sit. Once they were all set, we spray painted the cut lines on the floor. Notice the 4 holes with chains coming out of the concrete. Now these were used to secure artwork when the previous owner was working with metal sculptures or structures. As a point of reference, this is a real photograph from many years ago in the studio of 12-foot tall sculptures used in a commercial park entrance, each weighing 10,000 pounds. The red eye is where the full-rise lift is currently, and notice the catwalk behind right there and the chains in the ground right here. So clearly, lots of artwork took place in this building before I purchased it, which to me gave it really good karma. Each of these holes needed to be dug out and eventually filled in with concrete. The same with the squelch pit as well. The floors were then cut and jackhammered in anticipation of installing the lifts in a few weeks. As we found out, the concrete was reinforced with rebar, which is great for structural rigidity and strength, but not so good when you're trying to cut it out. Once all the holes were cut, they laid down pipes that would later contain the hydraulic lines running back up to the lift mechanicals, which would be hidden inside the cabinets, and the controls protruding from the sides for easy and clean access. They also reinstalled rebar for extra strength around the perimeters of the lift. Then Gordy and I went up to the 3rd floor with the drawings and the architectural renderings to map out where the spiral stairs and eventually the hole would need to be cut in the 3rd floor. If you're looking for an honest construction company, I put Hallis Construction's info in the description. Nicest guy on the planet, works hard and honest. Yes, I said honest. It's a crazy thing to say these days, but he is unbelievably honest. Anyhow, once the walls were down, we needed to shore up the structure with additional support requested by our engineer. To do this, I enlisted a longtime bud and drag racer, Jim Beckman from Jim's Welding.
He's eating lunch.
Eating lunch?
Yeah, I was filming him stuffing his face.
First, we picked out 4x4 square tubes and wheeled them into the shop. The pieces were measured, cut, sanded, and a 12x5 inch steel plate was welded on the end. Then the 4 pieces were painted and brought to the studio, lifted up and welded into place. They also welded smaller gussets to the existing steel frame as well. Then we replaced the thin steel that held the 3rd floor loft up with thicker posts because we removed all the previous metal framing as well. So obviously there was lots of sawing and grinding and twisting and pulling trying to remove the old stuff, and then we replaced it with much thicker, much heavier and stronger steel posts, so we needed fewer of them so that the room felt a bit more open. We also repeated the process on the other side. Now, as a testament to the previous owner, downstairs we asked Jim to bring his plasma cutter to remove the old metal door in the back of the bay, as this is where my future Moduline cabinets will go. This door and the front door were handmade and extremely specific to each area, which made it challenging to remove, exemplifying again how fastidious the previous owner was about his work. And an hour or so later, the door frame was finally removed.
Bingo!
The next day, we planned for the HVAC install per the drawings. There was square duct running along the back wall and exposed spiral duct around the inside of the first bay. Meanwhile, in the backyard, Giovanni is building a concrete pad for the new compressor and central vac canisters. So upstairs, we extended the catwalk to my office by 2 feet and the second floor balcony by 18 inches so that it overhangs the first floor a bit and gives the viewer a more intimate look at the cars below. To do this, Jim's team welded a new frame for Gordy to eventually lay a new floor over. Now, at about the same time, Gordy was framing out the new bathroom, shower, closets, and the crawl space storage upstairs. Once the balcony was in, Jim then welded all the railings and the posts in by hand that would line the perimeter of the second and third floor, respectively. Each of these posts would require 12 holes for wires and a 1/4-inch steel top that would be fastened to the wood railing. With those in place, matching hardwood floors were installed in the new areas to match the existing. In my office, holes were cut into the pre-existing floor for the HVAC return lines. Now, with all the walls and ceilings downstairs exposed, I asked Dave from Nutmeg Central Vac to run 2-inch PVC piping with extended sweeps at 90 degrees and 45 degrees that would allow the hose to be retracted easily despite being all the way across the room. Each hose runs about 40 feet and is on both sides of the base for easy vacuuming access as well as storage as it retracts back into the system. Dave also ran pipes up to the second floor for easy access for cleaning my office and the bathroom and all the floors upstairs. Once Dave was all done with the pipes, he ran them back outside to the compressor housing and terminated them in the vacuum-aid CS66 built by Lindsay Manufacturing. Now, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out which one would be the best for this particular setup, and these were it. Each can handle up to 10,000 square feet, which is way more than the building itself, and I have 2 of them. So it has tremendous suction, it's not going to be overwhelmed, and it's incredibly useful. Next up was the electrical walkthrough and lighting dry fit in all the rooms. I'm going to fast forward a little bit here, but all the wires and Cat6 cables were run throughout the building, and then we test fitted the Hexagrid lights that would go up on the second bay ceiling. Now, I've received 1,000 emails about these lights already. They're insane. If you want them, click the link in the description. One of my favorite parts of the building by far. Now, we discovered the trick to these is to assemble them first on the floor, then measure how they might fit and play with them a little bit here and there. Once we were done with the fit, we numbered each individual light and stored them in the box until the sheetrock, painting, and new breaker box was completed in a few weeks. Meanwhile, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to keep a piece of the previous owner in the building because I think he was a talented guy, so I decided to keep his handmade front doors. They weigh several hundred pounds each. They're all handmade but lacking security as the center glass area was only a thin plexiglass. So in truth, at this point, I was getting way overwhelmed with building codes and still trying to keep up with my detailing business to pay for all this work. So I called my hockey buddy, Ben Pilchard from Academy Design and Construction to help me keep the project within budget and on time. He specializes in unique projects. In other words, he's a talented designer, problem solver, kind of like wrapped into a construction consultant who helped me design the details and get them built far exceeding my expectations while at the same time reviewing all the contractor invoices and change orders and basically making sure that everything was organized and on schedule. First, we needed to install steel in the middle of the door, then welding a door lock. As of now, it just had a padlock setup. To do this, Ben sketched up his idea of what the door should look and feel like, and then we sent it over to Jim's Welding. At the welding shop, I met Scott. He's a police officer by day and a custom metal fabricator on his off days. Based on Ben's sketch and Scott's creativity, we came up with a riveted design similar to this. We used one piece of 1/8 inch stainless steel to avoid rusting and to continue that sort of metal look and feel with an aluminum perforated sheet with round holes laid on top to create a medieval type insert based on the weight of the door and the original Hungarian design. Meanwhile, back at the shop, Brian, our AV guru, was mocking up different sized TVs so I could get a feel for what would be an appropriate size to see from across the room, as I would need to be able to read comments from the live feeds from the back of the car, as well as installing the projector system for future training presentations. Downstairs, the guys were installing the new sheetrock everywhere, and the taper was following right behind them. Now, outside, it was time to move the beast of a compressor built for me by Industrial Gold in Mansfield, Texas. I decided to go with the Cube Air System compressor that has plenty of power to keep up with the multi-users during future trainings. Now, I saw these guys at SEMA, and I totally fell in love with their design simplicity and the fact that they have this space-saving setup because I didn't have a ton of room in the shop to take up for some ginormous compressor. Further to my point, based on the size of my building lot, meaning the actual space around my building, we didn't have enough room to slide the compressor around the backside of the studio, so we had to call in a crane to lift it over the building and place it on the new concrete pad in the backyard. For attempt 1, we were just a few feet short. As you can see, the compressor is dangling really high up in the air over the building, and we just missed it by about 3 or 4 feet. With a new game planned and the truck closer to the building, we tried again. This time, we cleared the roof and placed the compressor on rubber pucks. While we were up on the roof directing the compressor, we noticed a few cracks and dents in the skylights that needed to be replaced. The weather vane also was handmade, and it seems like the previous owner had a great sense of humor. Later that afternoon, Gordy installed the kitchen cabinets while Ben and I discussed options for wall colors based on a picture I saw on Pinterest that I really loved. So with this as inspiration, we ordered up a few colors to see how the samples would work together. In the backyard, Ivaldo was building a shed around the compressor and the central vac system to protect it from the weather and to reduce the ambient noise. In the bathroom, we discussed which tile and patterns should be used for the shower. We ended up choosing the hexagon tiles to match the Hexagrid lights that would soon be installed downstairs. Next, Ben wanted to tackle the upstairs studio by bringing in some wood and metal pieces to tie in the rest of the building decor. This would be the backdrop for my podcast, and we wanted to make it unique yet still deliver a message. As you can see, the first attempt caused too much glare on the wall and in the camera, so we tried to find unfinished wood that would not be as reflective. With the walnut on order, we focused on the hardwood floor stain by creating a test panel with an extra strip of flooring. Keep in mind, all these activities are happening at the same time. It sort of felt like chaos to me, but a controlled orchestra to Ben. Downstairs, the new office windows just arrived. Upstairs, Marcelo is building the modular spiral staircase, which gets delivered as a huge jigsaw puzzle, so it takes a lot of time to assemble. Later that day, the walnut bundle arrived for the podcast wall, and Ben quickly resketched out a new or darker design that matches the walnut and also incorporates a 1x1 metal tube between 2 pieces of wood. It's absolutely stunning. I'll have more on this in a second. Next, the team gently lifted all the windows and secured them into place. Now notice the window closest to the wall, which will be near my desk. It has a sliding window, so I can open it up from the second floor and call down to someone on the first floor if need be. Now, Ben thought of this way in advance, which I thought was really cool. Meanwhile, while Marcelo and I sorted through about 1,000 different parts for the staircase, Ivaldo installed the new window in the editing suite, which is upstairs. Now, the next major step was painting. I first had to remove all the dust, and I tried to do it with a blower I borrowed from Steve across the street. In hindsight, it was a lot of fun. I blew everything everywhere. I was completely covered, but probably not the best move. Lesson learned. Anyhow, when I was done, I called my detailing buddy Dan to help me paint literally everything. Looking back on it, this was an absolutely gigantic task for just 2 people. We first started with the ceilings on both the north and south side of the building, as well as the middle bay, which required a scissor lift and a bunch of nerves that go all the way up to the ceiling. I won't bore you with a week of painting, but let's just say that you really find out who your friends are when you're painting an entire building. Dan the man is awesome, and I'm truly grateful for all his help. Meanwhile, at Jim's Welding, Ben and Jim are going over the initial door design and the Porsche GT3 handles made from real parts that I got from Speed Sport Tuning's used parts bin. A little later, Jim cut 1x1 metal bars that we needed for the podcast wall. Then Ben and I that same day went to Home Depot to get some 2x4s and plywood to mock up a fake floor for the floor guy to come in and do some test panels so we could all get on the same page prior to him actually burning my brand new hardwood floors. Now, this is Marlon from Lotus Flooring. He moved from Brazil to the United States about 10 years ago and specializes in unique floor designs while using low VOC products. Now, at the same time, he also happens to be a professional dancer and choreographer performing throughout the East Coast, including places like MetLife Stadium and with the world-renowned K-pop group BTS. Marlon is performing a Japanese wood burning technique to age the material and give it a unique look and feel. Now, clearly, there are many different ways to burn it combined with different types of stains that Ben thought it prudent to do a few tests until we feel comfortable enough to actually do it on the real studio floors, which totally makes sense. As you know, I'm a huge nerd and a note taker. This is a 3-inch binder full of everything from pictures to permits for the studio. Based on Ben's pictures, we felt Sedona Red would work best. I'll have a full step-by-step video on how to do this to your floors or table on the studio channel coming soon. With the test complete, it was now time to order the floor materials in bulk. Now keep in mind, while all this is going on, Dan and I are still painting in the background. This time we're working on the first floor, so we primed and then painted it. The color was called Cyberspace from Sherwin-Williams. It's a really cool color. Over the next few days, we were still painting and Marcel was still building the stairs. Then my overhead garage doors arrived. First, Ron and Steve removed the old doors, then reinstalled the new frosted glass panels to add a bit more light to the studio for filming. The huge overhead door on the right-hand side, the bay number 1, that'd have to wait another week or two as we needed more parts. Later that afternoon, we test fitted the Bendpak lifts to make sure everything fit into the templates that were sent over a few weeks earlier. The boxes come neatly packed with all the tools, hoses, and hardware included. With the hole ready, we borrowed my neighbor Steve's engine lift.
What do you want now?
And dropped them into place. We repeated the same test fit process for the larger lifts in bay number 1 as well. Upstairs, the shower is getting installed and the walnut wood is being placed on the outside of the studio wall, which was a last-minute change order to sort of mimic the inside wall of the studio and to kind of give it this treehouse type feel. It was pretty cool. At this point in the project, we're really starting to take off. I'm now painting the steel on the first, second, and third floor with a fresh coat of black. Paul from Almeida Plumbing is installing the tankless water heater with a temperature gauge at the bottom to regulate my pressure washer temperature to a specific setting. Now, this is super cool. I'll have more on this later. The bathroom floor is getting sealed. We're measuring TV placement and vertical lights in bay number 2. Later on that day, Gordy showed us options for hand railing material and different edge cuts for us to decide.
Then it's not so pointy, you know what I'm saying?
On my office floor, Ben and I arranged the wood on the floor here to mimic the podcast wall to make sure it would fit correctly and to be exact to Ben's original sketch. So basically, we created sort of a mock-up on the floor with a red chalk line, including the hidden TV cutout, and then arranged the pieces around it just to make sure it would all fit. The following week, the bathroom tile, the railing cable, and the podcast wall would all be assembled. So the first thing I did was paint the podcast wall a darker color because it was originally obviously sheetrock, and I didn't want that white sheetrock sort of bleeding through in case the wood didn't perfectly line up with each other. Then what we did downstairs was number the wood so that when Giovanni would come back later and install it on the actual wall once the paint was dry, it would basically be a big jigsaw puzzle. Ben also designed a few shelves into the wall that would match the ones that are down on the first floor. Now, I can't express to you how much thought, effort, and design went into this particular podcast wall. Ben is on another level when it comes to specificity of his particular designs. He's sort of like watching a true craftsman paint a car. Watching Ben sketch out all the designs and the aspects of the build is pretty cool to see in person. Now, if you've managed to stay this long in the video, here is one of my favorite parts of the building, the bathroom. Ben designed what we refer to as the, quote, airplane bathroom. I had no idea what he meant until I actually saw the sketch. It needed to have a round edge, sheet metal, and a bunch of rivets. To do this, Evaldo installed MDF board known as medium density fiber board on the round edge for stability. This required literally hundreds of nails to secure it in place due to the curvature. While he was doing that, I was outside painting my bathroom vanity because the fixture that would fit best in that bathroom didn't come in black, so nothing a can of primer in black can't fix. While we waited for Gordy to bring a roll of galvanized sheet metal, Ivaldo cut a hole out of the kitchen countertop to put the sink into its permanent home. Once the metal arrived, it was installed in overlapping layers to give the look and feel of a riveted airplane exterior. Ben, of course, had a picture and examples for the guys to work from to make sure that everyone was on the same page. I'll fast forward through the rest of this day, but the extent of the craftsmanship was absolutely amazing. Each piece was specific to the next, each rivet perfectly measured from one to the other. I can't say this enough, but the experience of actually building my dream studio, although very stressful at times, was an amazing privilege to watch in person and of course film and then share with you guys on YouTube. It really means a lot to me. Next, Marlon was back to burn all the floors. First, he sanded everything smooth while I was painting the front door and the trim, upstairs ceiling was getting taped, and the vents installed on the second floor HVAC system. Next, they vacuumed and puttied any cracks and gaps in the wood. Then they came back and sanded once again in the tight areas. Possible future detailing tool? I don't know, maybe, but it looks pretty cool. With all the floors sanded and prepped, we now started on the third floor. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I was completely nervous about using blowtorches on my brand new floors in a building that I didn't want to burn down. In other words, we couldn't really mess this up and I didn't want to have to put a new floor down, so we were definitely committed at this point. The first pass is to char the wood so that the grain pops out. Now, the one thing that we didn't factor in was the heat. Now, obviously we're on the third floor and using blowtorches, but it was dangerously hot up there. With a game plan for a design, Marlon burned the floor to create my unique look. However, my job at this point was to spray the guys down with water because it was dangerously hot up there. Later on, they used smaller blowtorches with handles for the tight areas and the fine work. Next, we moved downstairs and I went across the street and once again borrowed a fan from my favorite neighbor, Steve. Also keep in mind that this process of burning and sanding and all that took about a week from start to finish. What took up a lot of time is they actually did each spiral stair. They did the underneath, the top, and the sides, as well as the trim that sat on top of the metal beam. It's super intricate work. We also repeated the same process on my desktops and my podcast table as well. By the next day, all the burning was completed, so Marlon and his team were now in the staining process. Again, I'll have a full-length video with each step-by-step and the tools used on the studio channel in the future, but for now, know that they stained for an entire day. The following day, Marlon sealed it, then sanded again, then put a final coat on, all of which took hours and hours to complete. Outside, we had to hand sand the desks in the parking lot using the car headlight beams, high beams, because the garage didn't actually have any light. There was no electrical in the building yet, and we did a final coat and finish right there, and we were good to go. So the guy is amazing. After a long weekend, next up were the Moduline cabinets. Now, these are the same ones that I have in my home garage. They're absolutely stunning and hands down the best cabinets I've ever had, so I had to have them in the studio. John and Evan arrived in a box truck filled with cabinets. First, they assessed the renderings to the physical space before unloading all the tools, boxes, and equipment off the truck. Keep in mind, all of these cabinets are handmade in Massachusetts, so they can walk you through pretty much any setup for your garage, your office, or your trailer. Now, ironically, Matt Farah and I are both building our dream garages at the same time, and he happens to have Moduline cabinets in his garage in LA as well. After just one day, all the cabinets were installed except, quote, 2 surprise pieces, which I would find out a little bit later. Also keep in mind they had to build the cabinets in advance around steel braces that they didn't see until they got there, which wasn't easy to do, and they did it with no problem. So any normal garage or typical garage setup is going to be a breeze for them to build. With the cabinets installed, the boys from Overhead Door Brookfield were back to remove and replace the larger garage door. This was probably the busiest day of the entire build process. The guys made it look easy, but it wasn't. Everything was custom built or fabricated to work with the pre-existing steel structures, look visually appealing, and most important, be safe. This wasn't easy to do, and they did it. At the same time, while the door guys were here, the mason was here reinforcing the lift walls, the electrician was here installing emergency lights, door handles were getting screwed in, vertical lights being hung, the podcast room refrigerator from New Air getting installed flush to the wall to save space. This is a must-have for long editing sessions, and the car lift motors were being test wired for power. Later that day, Manny and I moved the soapbox racer up to the 3rd floor loft to make space for Paul the plumber. Now, I found this soapbox on Craigslist in a nearby town, and when I went to go pick it up, the seller actually had an ammo sticker on his kid's 4-wheeler. How freaking cool is that? I had never met the guy. He didn't know my name. I only said Larry's coming to pick it up. He didn't know who I was. And then I saw my ammo sticker when I walked into his garage. It was an unbelievable feeling that I'll never forget. Now, going back to Paul the plumber, at this point, he was ready to run the Prevost compressed air lines. Not only are these things stunning from a visual perspective, they're also built like a brick house, especially with this much air moving through the pipes.
So that drills a hole, and he stops it from going through. So, pretty neat. I mean, the system, they thought about everything. If you look in the back over here, see that hole right there?
Yeah.
So that's the guy who makes the hole.
Oh, I see.
So this shoulder here bottoms out on that.
Oh, I see it. This guy right there.
Yeah, that little shoulder right here bottoms out on there, so that way you don't go through the other side of the pipe.
Wow. They thought a lot.
Yeah, I mean they have a little mark on the side so you can center it and everything.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. I like that. No guesswork,
Now, the pipes and fittings are actually patented and guaranteed not to leak, which I love, and they're extremely light and coated with an external epoxy primer. As you can see, it's blue. It's sharp. It pops off against the wall, and the inside is treated to protect against oxidation. These will feed 6 air hose reels with a 33-foot, 3/8-inch diameter industrial-grade rubber hose and a swiveling mounting bracket. The couplers are pretty cool. They have a single push-button release for your air gun that comes in various sizes, all with an anti-scratch and anti-static composite body. As you can see, the air lines are running through the wall and back into the shed where we installed air filtration, water separators, microfiltration, and active carbon filtration up to 1500 CFM. In other words, this thing is a beast. I found my air system at buffdaddy.com. Go there to find out more about how to set up your garage. Paul is installing the lines based on renderings created by Prevost for a precise fit and finish. I'll also have a separate in-depth video with step-by-step install procedures and manufacturer interview coming soon on the Studio channel. Now on to the Hexagrid lights. First, CV the electrician placed a laser level on the workbench and shot it across the bay onto the door to show where dead center was in that space. Next, he put down protective paper and then laid out each 2-foot strip of lights that were numbered a few weeks ago during the test fit. By first building them on the floor, CV and Danny could visualize where each should go on the ceiling before screwing in the bracket to hold each individual piece. The corner of the hexagons are actually a 3-pronged piece of plastic, creating that hexagon shape as they go along. As always, as this is going on, 10,000 other things are going on in the background. The shelves are being measured and installed. Steel beams are being carried upstairs and installed behind my office desk. And the rails for the big bay doors are getting test fitted before the final installation. It was a busy day, to say the very least. With the first grid hooked up to the power, this thing was as beautiful as it was functional. And after a few hours, all the pieces were installed and connected, giving the detailer a clear view of the paint during correction. The next morning, we sealed the concrete within the lift cutouts in preparation for installing the new garage floor. With the lifts put back into place, we then needed to use spacers to make sure that they were perfectly level with the adjacent floor. As you can see there, Manny placed a 1/4 inch steel spacer at the bottom, then on top put super thin spacers and tested it several times. Once happy with the fitment, we drilled holes into the concrete and used the supplied bolts to fasten it to the ground. We repeated the same steps on the other side. Up next was the garage floor. I covered the cabinets and swept the floor before we sanded the concrete. I put the Modulines in first before doing the floor to avoid possibly scratching or scuffing the fresh epoxy during the cabinet installation. After a heavy abrasion, the cracks were first cut out with a diamond-plated wheel, exposing the crack sort of like a dentist in a cavity. Then it was filled with Mircap 445, 2 parts A to 1 part B, along with cellulose powder to thicken the material. As some of you may know, I did my home garage floor in a video a few years ago, and it peeled up in about 2 weeks, and it now looks terrible. I didn't want to make the same mistake twice, so instead of searching for best garage floor companies, instead I searched for best garage floor coatings, and then found out who the manufacturer recommends to install their products. So it's a way different approach than last time. So that's where I found Elitecrete and their certified installer in my area, which was the floorcaregroup.com. Next, the epoxy is quickly poured into the crack before it hardened up the following day. In the morning, the rock-hard epoxy was sanded flat, then E100 VB5 Part A and B were mixed and then rolled onto the floor to prevent moisture buildup that could disrupt the integrity of the following layers. After the barrier was dry, a solid coat of medium gray 2-part epoxy was squeegeed across the floor. The next morning, the team sanded the finish much the same as you would in between coats of a show car paint job, and then added another layer of base. They also added a non-slip barrier around each lift for safety, and then added a temporary rubber barrier to protect the trim from the following steps as it dries. For the design phase, they used Elitecrete's charcoal pearl within the clear epoxy. These products need to mix for a specific time, in this case it was 2 minutes, for it to blend properly and to create the desired cloud-like pattern. Beforehand, the floor was sanded yet again to promote best adhesion, then it was squeegeed across the floor first before using circle or rotating motions to create this cloud-like finish, and then it was let to dry overnight. The next morning, the final UV protection coat was added. Now, this was obviously done to protect their work, but it's also done because I installed 8 scan grip lights around the perimeter of the bays, and the intensity of those lights was something to consider. Because of that, we added Elitecrete's AUSV, which is a satin aggregate, to knock down or mute the gloss reflection due to the intensity of the lights and to avoid glare in the camera lens. Lastly, they added door aprons by laying down coal tar epoxy with a trowel, then sprinkling black sand-like grit for grippiness within the tar. When they were all done, it looked absolutely gorgeous. Keep in mind, this entire process took about 10 days with all the curing, but the added little touches and the extreme care they took is very obvious when you walk into the studio, so don't skimp on this part of the build. While all this is going on, Scott from Jim's Welding was installing the doors designed by Ben. First, the plexiglass needed to be unscrewed and removed, then the edges were sanded before adding the large sheet metal design. In this case, Scott is using a TIG welder that uses argon gas to shield the weld from the atmosphere, basically keeping oxygen out of the weld that could create bubbles, potentially weakening its strength. Next, the frame is sanded, reinstalled, and welded again before we added insulation between the front and back panels to keep the winter out of the shop. Then the back panel is welded over the insulation. Next, the peephole is measured, cut out, and installed. I later switched out to a black version of the peephole. I got the wrong color and it was making me nuts. Later on that day back at Jim's shop, Scott and Jim were working on the GT3 pinion shaft door handle for the outside and playing around with options for the inside handle on the bench. After a bit of debating, we headed back to the studio and cut off the old door handles with a grinder. The brand new handles were measured, the metal around it was sanded and then tacked into place. The same exact steps were repeated for the piston inside handles as well, possibly one of my favorite parts of the studio.
Dude, I like that.
That's
I scoured the internet to see if anybody has ever done this, piston door handles. I couldn't find any pictures.
This is great.
At this point, we were almost done and I was really pushing hard to the finish line. Inside, new HVAC doors were being installed after Ben designed the look, feel, and specific gap size to allow enough airflow into the system. 8 scan grip lights were being placed along the perimeter of bay number 1 and all controlled from one wall switch. Upstairs, the carpet was being installed in the editing and podcasting suite to absorb the sound. Then we installed the projector screen across from bay number 1's opening and above the office windows. Next, we tested the screen and aligned the distance from the wall to the projector lens before mounting it on the ceiling. Downstairs, we ran all the hydraulics to the Bendpak lifts to make sure that they operated properly before testing it out on an actual car. Once again, I'll have a full-length video of how this was installed in the ground and the hydraulic lines run to the cabinets. If you remember earlier in the video, Moduline wanted to surprise me with these custom faceplates designed to house the lift buttons cleanly within the cabinets themselves. Now, they wanted the cabinets to be in first before making the plates to make sure that everything fit properly. This was a super ridiculously nice touch on their part. I'm really happy with that. Now that we're so close to the finish line, I wanted to bring in one of my favorite artists, Vizie. I follow him on Instagram, and he's known for his large graffiti murals on buildings and city blocks, and I think his art is incredibly unique. So I reached out to his agent at hpluscreative.com and got the ball rolling. I really wanted him to create a mural on my back wall, and if he was up for it, a hand-painted ammo logo, ammo shield, and drive and protect across the airplane door. But honestly, I would have been thrilled to have any artwork from him. I'm just excited to have him in the building. But first, we had to board up the window to create a perfect canvas for the larger mural. While we were working on that, downstairs he projected the logos on their respective walls and hand-painted them into place, which was super cool of him to do. Now, for the mural, I wanted a Vizie original design. I gave him a starting off point of the bond between man and machine, or the love of one's car, that kind of thing, and then I stepped aside and just let him think for a week or two. In the meantime, while he was designing, Ben suggested we install 3 5x12 sheets of 3/4 inch cabinet plywood as a canvas for Vizie to paint. Once the window was all covered up, Ben sketched out a hanging bracket system to hold the plywood that would allow me to move the picture in the future if I wanted to hang it in another building or location. In other words, by building this hanging bracket system, the wood would be an inch off the wall, giving the viewer a little bit of a picture frame type depth, as well as it being portable in the future. Once the canvas fit perfectly, I removed and painted both the front and back sides of each piece of wood as a primer so that it wouldn't warp later. A few days later, when he was ready with the larger mural, we had an extra piece of wood and we created a little tabletop on top of the lift so that he could put his ladder and projector as high as possible and shoot it onto the wall. With it on the wall, he could trace it, which makes it a little bit easier because it's such a large canvas. It's hard to know where you are without backing up completely, and you can't really do that in this little catwalk area. As you can probably tell by now, the studio color was chosen from the same gray color wheel so that the vehicle would always be the focus and not the wall. However, on the back wall of the second floor, I wanted a vibrant color to draw the eye and to bring some life and movement into the space. In truth, by now, the anticipation was really killing me, but I promised to leave him alone as much as I could, so I went downstairs and I caulked the floor, I vacuumed with the central vac, I repainted a few areas, and otherwise just tried to stay out of his hair. Over the weekend, he continued to work on all the projects, the downstairs ammo and the bathroom walk-through shield, the airplane bathroom door with the vertical drive and protect that was inspired by my invitation to the grand opening party of Ammo NYC in downtown Manhattan, and of course, the large surprise mural that had a powerful color palette as it slowly came to life. When his work was complete, I was left with this piece of original art, an absolutely stunning interpretation of the bond between man and machine. I'm honored to have it in the studio, and I was grateful for Vizie for taking on a project of this scope. Okay, if you thought we were done with the front door, we're not. We needed to secure it properly with locks to pass fire code and the upcoming inspections. To do this, Scott cut out a section of the steel for the lockbox and then removed the old padlock bracket. With the new lock sort of mocked up, we needed to cut a hole for the mounting plate on the front side of the door. Once done, then the box was welded into place. In the meantime, while we were waiting for the lock internal pieces to arrive, Scott devised a kingpin for the double-sided doors out of the extra speed sport tuning old parts. He first welded a transmission gear on top of a shift ratchet from a 911 Cup car. After a few measurements and test fits, he decided it needed a bit more support. So he then welded a Porsche valve to one side and cut out a mounting plate for the valve to sit on. By the way, we had to go back and forth to his shop in his truck, and I will be cleaning his truck in a future episode because it is absolutely disgusting. Once we got back to the studio, his mock-up made a bit more sense to me because I didn't know exactly where he was going with it, but as he plugged it in and welded everything together, the door became much more secure and more sturdy than it was previously. By now, all the internals arrived, so he installed those as well as the SimpliSafe mounting plate that holds the SimpliSafe door lock unit. When all is said and done, at 150 pounds each door, they're not going anywhere, and I feel really secure. Okay, we're almost done. We finally installed the washer and dryer, the refrigerator, the shower doors, we sealed the driveway and hung the Signature Series Academy Design cabinets and cleaned up the entire place. And of course, did another 1,000 things. But were we 100% done? No, but I wanted to do one last thing before I end this video. hang a picture of my dear friend Spencer Cox on the wall next to Steve McQueen and Paul Newman. Men who I admired for their strength, humility, philanthropy, and of course conviction to motorsports. If you remember, Spencer built the Ammo 964. He mentored me on the track and in the classroom. He was featured in dozens of my videos and allowed me to get out of my tiny little home garage and film in his beautiful shop at Speed Sport Tuning. Without his immense kindness, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to film many of my videos and grow the channel that would eventually inspire me to build this very building. In October 2019, I spent a few minutes in Spencer's office describing my vision for the studio and thanking him for letting me hide out at Speed Sport Tuning for nearly 6 years. I jokingly said to him, "Hey, I'll be out of your hair for now, but I'll be just down the road." He was so enthusiastic and supportive. I gave him a big hug and I told him I couldn't wait to show him the finished space. 1 month later, on Sunday, November 24th, 2019, my dear friend Spencer passed away at the age of 57 from cancer, and I miss him a lot, to say the very least. I'm grateful for what he did for me and for the subscribers of the Ammo channel. I know he'd be happy of what I just built. I miss you very much, Spencer, and I hope to see you again. Well, guys, there you have it. The Ammo NYC Studio is finally done, sort of. We have a few more things to do. I'm always kind of tweaking and playing with things, but overall, it looks phenomenal. I didn't even envision it to be this good. It's way better than I can imagine, and that's really a testament to the people who've worked in this building and sort of helped me plan and design and build, and of course, sort of motivate me to get to this place. So, huge thank you to everyone who's been involved, and really, this is kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me to do something like this, and to bring you guys along and to share that moment is really meaningful on a little bit of a different level than a normal video. So thank you again. I have a lot more stuff coming out. Again, my mission, my purpose is to really educate people and get them excited about working on their car and kind of get that therapy, and just there's something special about that, and I'm trying to get my hands around it and define it, and I think what's exciting is I can't really define it at this point, and so this building is helping me sort of tell that story. Anyhow, thank you so much for watching. A lot more to come. I'll talk to you guys soon.